You're sitting in your chair at home when you suddenly hear a scratching noise coming from your wall. It's an older house, so it doesn't bother you too much, but the noise keeps on persisting. After a while, you get annoyed with the constant rustle. That annoyance turns to a hesitant fear as you hear what sounds to be a voice coming from inside the wall. Hello?
Hello.
What are you?
I am a freak. I have hands and I have feet, and if you saw me you'd faint. You'd be petrified, mummified, turned into stone or a pillar of salt.
You stare at the wall, stunned at the responses that you're receiving.
My name's Jeff. What's yours?
My name's Voiry. Voiry Irving. Hello, Voiry.
A pleasure.
A pleasure to meet you.
You see human fingers begin to emerge from a crack in the wall. This is the first encounter between the Irving family and Jeff, the Dalby Spook. Welcome to this episode of the podcast. Today we'll be talking about Jeff, the talking mongoose, also known as the Dalby Spook. This cryptid is one of the special ones in that there's only one and it's tied to a very specific area. In September of 1931, the entire Irving family claimed to have heard the auditory phenomena that was produced by Jeff. This phenomena included scratching, rustling behind the wooden wall panels, and vocal noises that sounded like a ferret, dog, and even a human baby. A bit different from how I voiced it in the intro, but that was just an artistic liberty I took. I don't think anyone wants to hear me attempt a baby voice, and deep voices from animals just sound more demonic in my opinion. I think hearing me try to voice Voiry was enough of a punishment for all of you. The family, consisting of James, father, Margaret, the mother, and Voiry, the daughter, all claimed to have heard, seen, and interacted with Jeff at some point, and they said he was actually pretty useful. They said he guarded their home, gave them a heads up when unfamiliar guests approached the house, and woke people up whenever they overslept. If someone forgot to put out the fire at night, Jeff would go down and stop the stove. Whenever mice got into the house, he'd scare them off. Jeff was basically a cat in the family's eyes. In exchange for his services, the family gave him biscuits, chocolates, and bananas. They would leave food for him in a saucer suspended from the ceiling, which he would take when he thought no one was watching. The Irvings also claimed that Jeff would accompany them on trips to the grocery store, but curiously, he never went in with them. He'd prefer to stay on the other side or in the hedges near the grocery store, obscured from any curious eyes. Jeff was said to be a yellow-colored mongoose with the ability of human speech. According to Voiry, he was the size of a small rat and had a big bushy tail. Jeff told the family he was born in New Delhi, India in 1852, making him 79 years old at the time of this incident. Depending on the species of mongoose, their lifespan ranges from 6 to 22 years, nothing close to Jeff's alleged age. He describes himself as being an earthbound spirit and a ghost in the form of a mongoose. Media. Once the story had been spread around, it was a wildfire that couldn't be stopped. The tabloid press and journalists flocked to the Isle of Man to try to catch a glimpse of the creature. Several other people, both locals and visitors, claimed to have heard Jeff's voice, and 2 claimed to have even seen it. This incident also attracted the attention of paranormal and psychic investigators. Some notable investigators were Richard S. Lambert and Harry Price. The Listener was a British magazine that was published from 1929 and ended in 1991. I needed to bring that up so that you have some frame of reference for who I'm talking about in a second. In July 1935, the editor of The Listener, named Richard S. Lambert, and his friend, paranormal investigator Harry Price, went to the Isle of Man to investigate this peculiar case. This visit ended up turning into a book named The Haunting of Cashin's Gap, published in 1936. In the book, they avoided saying that they believed the story and put serious effort into reporting it objectively. The book talks about how a hair from Jeff was sent to Julian Huxley, the former president of the British Humanist Association. He then sent it to naturalist F. Martin Duncan, a naturalist and a man who's considered a pioneer of natural history filmmaking. Duncan would go on to identify it as a dog hair. It's suspected that the hair belonged to the family's sheepdog, Mona. Harry Price asked Reginald Pocock of the Natural History Museum to evaluate paw prints allegedly made by Jeff in plasticine, together with an impression of his supposed tooth marks. Plasticine is a type of soft, malleable modeling clay. Pocock couldn't match these prints to any known animal, but he did concede that one of them may have been conceivably made by a dog. He did plainly state that none of the markings, however, had been made by a mongoose. Upon Harry Price's visit to the home, he observed double walls of wooden paneling covering the interior rooms of the old stone farmhouse, which featured considerable interior airspace between stone, as well as walls, also made of wood, that made the whole house one great speaking tube, with walls like soundboards. By speaking into one of the many apertures in the panels, it should be possible to convey the voice to various parts of the house. So, we have a decent amount of credible, academic people essentially saying that all the evidence they're being presented about Jeff is bogus or inconclusive. Skepticism. Interestingly enough, some paranormal investigators thought that Jeff was a poltergeist or another type of ghost, which is a bit interesting for me to learn about because the family has always said that Jeff is a very real, intangible thing, not just some ghost that likes throwing things and stacking furniture when you're not looking. Skeptics, including residents of the Isle of Man, believe the Irving family had collaborated together in order to perpetuate a hoax. Many believe this was a scheme developed by the family's young daughter, Voirrey Irving. The Isle of Man Examiner, a local magazine, sent out a reporter who would go on to report that when he caught the girl making noises, her father tried to convince him the sound came from somewhere else. According to American paranormal investigator and skeptic Joe Nickel, he says that many researchers have suspected Voirrey of using ventriloquism and other tricks. Quote, "The effects of which were hyped by family members, reporters in search of a story, and credulous paranormalists." End quote. So, there are plenty of people stating that the entire thing is a hoax. It was a scheme developed by the family, and the performance of Jeff, the Indian poltergeist mongoose with human hands and feet, was done by a 13-year-old girl who was decently good at ventriloquism. I do want to say though that Voirrey Irving passed away in 2005, and for her entire life, she maintained that Jeff was not her creation, which in my mind is at least somewhat compelling. We have hardened criminals that aren't able to keep the same story for that long, and maybe it is just like a play on words that she's doing. It's not my creation, but maybe it was someone else's in the family's, like her dad's. It's possible. We just don't know. Conclusion. Margaret and Voirrey Irving left the home in 1945 after the death of James Irving. They reportedly sold the farm at a loss because it had the reputation of being haunted. In 1946, Leslie Graham, who had bought their farm, claimed in the press that he had actually shot and killed Jeff. Not so surprisingly, the body displayed by Graham was a black and white mongoose, and a much larger version than the famous yellow mongoose with human hands and feet. Voirrey Irving was certain in saying that the dead mongoose presented by Graham was in fact not Jeff. Funnily enough, in 1937, so about a year after the book he made was published, Richard S. Lambert, the magazine editor from earlier in the story, brought an action for slander against a man named Sir Cecil Levita, after Levita suggested to a friend that Lambert was unfit to be on the board of the British Film Institute. Levita said that Lambert was, quote, off his head, because he had believed in the talking mongoose and the evil eye. This actually resulted in a win for Lambert, which turned into him receiving £7,600 to pay for any damages to his reputation. Lambert didn't believe in the Dalby spook so hard that he was willing to sue someone for it and managed to win. This one's an interesting case because it's relatively recent and well documented. There were news articles, papers, books, and pictures. It also had a healthy variety of scientists involved in the investigations. The Dalby spook incident occurred in a really fun time where scientific techniques were still being developed, and pictures are just naturally kind of creepy. And I think there's enough wiggle room in the gaps between fact and speculation where you can suspend disbelief long enough to kind of enjoy the story. Next time you find yourself sitting at home on a quiet day and hear some rustling coming from your walls, maybe you even hear a voice coming from the walls or your ceiling, call the cops. Let someone else deal with it. That concludes this episode of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you enjoyed it, then like, subscribe, and share the podcast with your friends. This is Myths, History, and D&D, and I hope you tune in next time.